At the height of the summer in August 1868, less than 5 years after their midwinter arrival in Adrianople, Bahá'u'lláh, his family, and about 70 companions arrived at the port of Gallipoli. Initially ignorant of their destination and even less certain of their fate, they then set sail across the Mediterranean for the city of Alexandria in Egypt, where they found themselves crowded onto a smaller ship with little food and even less water, for the ordeal was not over yet. After 11 more grueling days, they finally arrived at the port city of Haifa, where they were once again transferred to even smaller sailboats, which drifted with agonizing slowness for 8 long hours under the scorching sun across the burning bay to Akka. By the time they reached the notorious penal colony of the Ottoman Empire, many of the exiles were at the limit of their endurance. And here at the sea gate of the city, they were told they had to wade ashore across the rocks. When the women protested against it, the governor gave orders to carry them unceremoniously on the backs of the stevedores. Abdul-Baha rejected the order. Among the first to land, he quickly acquired a chair, which was used to carry the women ashore with dignity. It was short-lived. They were stoned as they walked under escort through the narrow streets. Abuse was hurled at them all the way to the barracks. Knee-deep in filth, they passed under the barred doors and into the prison, and then the bolts were finally drawn behind them. Some were famished with hunger. All were parched with thirst. Abdul-Baha begged to be permitted to get food and water, but the soldiers would not allow it, threatening to kill anyone setting foot outside the prison. But the master was not so easily discouraged. He negotiated patiently, argued diplomatically, and after a few hours managed to send an appeal to the governor. At last, some brackish water and cooked rice were provided, which only those with the strongest stomachs could support. Soon the combination of sultry heat, damp cells, and acute physical depletion led to an outbreak of typhoid fever and dysentery among the prisoners. All of them, except for Abdul-Baha, his mother, and one of his aunts, fell desperately sick within days. But no physicians nor any medicines were allowed to them. However, the master had some quinine and bismuth with him. These and his constant care enabled most of the sick to survive. According to Bahá'í Khanum, he washed the patients, fed them, nursed them, and watched over them. He took no rest. In spite of his vigilance, however, 4 of the prisoners died. When he had brought the rest of us through the crisis, continues Bahá'í Khanum, and we were out of danger, utterly exhausted, he fell sick himself.
Even when death did not stalk among them, life in the prison was difficult for the exiles. The guards maintained strict control within and without the walls. One evening, Mirza Mehdi, Abdul-Baha's younger brother, had climbed up on the roof to say his prayers in the open air. As he walked back and forth in the twilight, his eyes lifted up to the starry skies, he lost his balance and fell through a skylight in the roof. The distance to the floor below was great, and the wooden crate on which he fell pierced his ribs so badly that the doctor who was summoned could do nothing for him. It was a devastating blow to the entire family who huddled around him. According to Bahá'í Khanum, their father gave him a choice during those last hours. Bahá'u'lláh gently asked him, "What do you desire? Do you wish to live, or do you prefer to die? Tell me what you most wish for." My brother replied, "I don't care to live. I have but one wish. I want the believers to be admitted to see their Lord. If you will promise me this, it is all I ask." Bahá'u'lláh assured his son that it would be as he desired. After much patient suffering, continues Bahá'í Khanum, my brother's gentle spirit took its flight. As we could not leave the barracks, we could not bury our dead, nor had we the means to purchase a coffin. We told our Lord of the sad situation. He replied that there was a rug in his room which we could sell. At first we demurred, for in taking his rug we took the only comfort he had, but he insisted, and we sold it. The death of this youngest and favourite child, of a very gentle and sweet disposition, nearly broke his mother's heart. As in so many other matters, it devolved upon Abdu'l-Baha once more to undertake the difficult arrangements at this time. It was he who had to negotiate with unscrupulous gravediggers for the burial of his own brother. After just over 2 years, the exiles were moved out of the fortress itself to make room for a newly arrived regiment who needed the barracks. Baha'u'lláh and his family were then placed within the narrow confines of the house of Aboud and detained inside the city walls for the next 7 years. Many significant events took place in this house, including the revelation by Baha'u'lláh in 1873 of the Kitab al-Aqdas, the most holy book of the Bahá'í dispensation. Another event also took place here, which marked a more modest change in Abdu'l-Baha's life and alleviated the family's circumstances. Bahiya Khanum and her mother had been eager for the master to marry for some time, and according to Oriental custom, many young girls had been proposed for his consideration. "Why should I marry?" he invariably asked. "Are there not enough to suffer now that we should propose to bring others into the world to share our lot?" Eventually, Baha'u'lláh intervened. He chose one young woman from among them, called Fatimeh, whom he named Munireh, or illumined, and calling Abdu'l-Baha into his room, asked his son if he might bring himself to accept this young woman as his bride. Abdu'l-Baha naturally consented, and as Bahiya Khanum recounts, "My brother undoubtedly sacrificed his own preference for a single life to the wishes of the rest of the family, especially his father." There was much rejoicing over this decision. Everyone looked forward to the wedding day, but it was delayed from month to month because of the cramped conditions of the house of Aboud. There was simply no suitable room for the newlyweds. Finally, Bahiya Khanum approached the landlord, who was a good-natured man, and told him of their predicament. Since he owned the adjoining building, he created an opening in the wall connecting the two courtyards and providing a furnished room for the young couple in the adjacent house. The master himself made all arrangements for the ceremony, which was performed by his father. But once it was over, he quietly withdrew, for it was his custom to spend each afternoon and evening visiting the poor and sick in Akka. His private concerns, even on an occasion like this, could not interfere with these duties. He did not return until after the guests had dispersed. Of the 9 children produced by this marriage, only 4 daughters lived to adulthood. The eldest, Ziya Khanum, was later to become the mother of Shoghi Effendi, who was the guardian of the faith. According to Munireh Khanum, "It is impossible to put into words the delight of being with the master. I seemed to be in a glorious realm of sacred happiness whilst in his company. In the youth of his beauty and manly vigour, with his unfailing love, his kindness, his cheerfulness, his sense of humour, his untiring consideration for everybody, he was marvellous, without equal, surely in all the earth."
Abdu'l-Baha's life in the house of Aboud was a strict round of duties and obligations. He would regularly visit the Al-Jazar Mosque to offer prayers and mingled with all who sought his advice, whether high or low. In addition to his own acts of daily charity, he maintained a rigorous correspondence and also produced numerous literary works at this time. One of these, a treatise written in 1875 titled The Secret of Divine Civilization, was ostensibly addressed to the rulers and people of Persia. It was published anonymously and widely distributed at its time. In fact, the treatise was a wake-up call to jolt Persia out of her slumber of fanaticism, to awaken her to the exigencies of the modern world. Abdu'l-Baha wrote, at his father's prompting and under his guidance, that a well-balanced understanding of the world and its people was only possible through progressive education, through a quest for knowledge and technological advancement. These, he stated, were the means to lead a nation to its material revival and spiritual enlightenment. Apart from all his other activities, Abdu'l-Baha was also an indispensable liaison between his father and the city officials during his imprisonment. The governor, Mezat Pasha, who was a former Grand Vizier and would in later years promote democracy in his country, developed, as did so many others, a great respect for Abdu'l-Baha. Through the master's intervention, this same governor finally permitted Bahá'u'lláh the freedom to leave the city walls in 1877 and allowed him to visit the surrounding countryside. Knowing his father had not seen any green for 9 years, Abdu'l-Baha rented a country house alongside a stream for him in Mazra'ah, 4 miles outside the city. He also prepared a beautiful garden for Bahá'u'lláh in memory of the Garden of Rezvan, which Bahá'u'lláh called his Emerald Isle. And after 2 years he rented the magnificent mansion of Bahji on the outskirts of Akka, where Bahá'u'lláh would live out the last days of his life. In order to enable his father to devote his time entirely to revealing tablets and conducting correspondence, the master remained in Akka to meet the day-to-day demands of officials and oversee the needs of the community. He became well known for his wisdom and knowledge. Even the governor approached him for advice on various matters, although the master was still formally his prisoner. He was sought out by all kinds of people, men and women who had family issues or who were wrongly accused of crimes, who had financial needs, or who were desperate for someone to be their advocate before a judge. Some lived in poverty and were simply in need of food or shelter. Some were sick, and since there was no hospital in Akka, the master paid a physician to look after those needing most care. He actually provided this doctor, Nikolai Bey, with a regular salary, requesting him not to divulge its source to others. Through such practices, the master uplifted the spirits and helped to educate and set standards of personal conduct for all to emulate, whether they happened to be Baha'is or not. On one occasion, he took the public coach, which had several stops. On embarking, the bus driver suggested perhaps a private carriage would be more suitable for a man of his stature. During the ride, a fisherwoman came to the master in distress, saying she had caught nothing all day. He gave her 5 francs and turned to the driver and said, "You now see the reason why I would not take a private carriage? Why should I ride in luxury when so many are starving?" He always put the concerns of others over the comfort of himself. Once, Bahir Khanum and Munire Khanum conspired together to buy him a fine cloak, as he often wore very rough clothing. Munire Khanum procured the necessary money from her brother and provided a tailor with the cloth to make the garment. Unfortunately, the tailor bungled the job, and when it became known to the master, Abdu'l-Baha sent for his brother-in-law. "You must sell that cloak," he said, "and charge me for the loss, whatever it may be. Such an amount of money will buy 4 cloaks, one of which is good enough for me. The others can be given away." Abdu'l-Baha frequently walked on foot from Akka to Bahji to visit his father. Bahá'u'lláh would be so eager to see him that he would frequently stand on the balcony in anticipation, looking out for his beloved son. The walk was long and very oppressive in the summer heat. Sometimes overcome with sunstroke or fatigue, the master would lie down on the ground and rest his head on a stone for a while. When Bahá'u'lláh asked why he did not ride to Bahji on a horse instead, Abdu'l-Baha replied, "How can I come to my Lord riding?" It was his habit, even when he rode on his donkey, to dismount as soon as he was within sight of the mansion, in order to walk the remaining half-mile towards his beloved. When Christ went out, he walked and slept in the fields, he used to say. Who am I that in visiting my Lord I should go as greater than Christ? Whenever Bahá'u'lláh saw his beloved son approaching, he would call out with joy for the servants to go out and conduct him to the mansion with all honor and respect.
The passing of Bahá'u'lláh in the early hours of the 29th of May, 1892, was a cause of grieving for the whole family. Their helper, their sustainer, their support was gone. Who would shelter them now? Who would protect them? But for Abdu'l-Baha, the loss was irreparable. It was a massive blow, for his father was the object of his adoration, the Lord he worshipped. He was also the closest person to him on this earth. And now he was gone, Abdu'l-Baha was alone with his sorrow. The sun of Baha has set, were the powerful and simple words he sent to Sultan Abdul Hamid to convey the news. It was immediately spread far and wide, and a multitude from Akka and the neighbouring villages soon flocked to Bahá'í and thronged the fields surrounding the mansion, weeping and lamenting their grief. All through the following week, a vast number of mourners, rich and poor alike, came to convey condolences and partake of the food lavishly dispensed under the directions of Abdu'l-Baha. Government officials, poets and religious leaders of all sects unitedly joined to lament the loss and magnify the virtues and greatness of Bahá'u'lláh. He was buried in a house next to the mansion of Bahá'í, the holiest spot towards which Baha'is the world over would turn in prayer forever after. 9 days after his passing, Abdu'l-Baha called for the will of Bahá'u'lláh, the Kitab-e-Ahd, or the Book of the Covenant, to be read aloud in the presence of all the friends and the family in Bahá'í. In it, Bahá'u'lláh named Abdu'l-Baha, the Master, the Mystery of God, to assume his mantle as head of the faith, as interpreter of his writings, as exemplar and centre of his covenant.